You're listening to 94.4 FM Salford City Radio, the Friday Sports Show.
You're listening to Salford City Radio 94.4 FM, the Friday Sports Show with your host, Jimmy Petruzzi. Bringing in news from the local area and the world, we bring Salford to the world and the world to Salford. We're very fortunate in this show. We've interviewed some of the world's best athletes, sports people, trainers, coaches, people who work in sport across a wide range of discipline, sports psychologists, you name it, we've interviewed on this show. We also have a segment featuring some of the most influential people in the field of psychology as well. We've heard some interesting insights and information from people in the field of psych as well. Today we have a fascinating guest. He's the head of performance at Preston North End, and he's also the founder of the heroPro app. And we'll get to know a little bit more about what that is and what his role, what it involves to be a head of performance. We've got a lot of passionate sports people who listen to the show, and people just generally are interested to hear what goes on in the world of professional sport. Who better to tell us more about that than today's guest, Tom Little, head of performance at Preston North End. Welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Thanks, Jimmy. I really appreciate the invite and looking forward to the show.
Yeah, and it's great to speak to you, Tom. And I suppose we start from the beginning. Head of performance, you are, and in terms of where did it all begin for you? How did you get into sort of performance in sport, Tom?
I think it was a mixture of natural selection and definitely a bit of luck along the way. So, like lots of kids, I absolutely loved sport growing up and played to a decent level, but never quite good enough to go on and make it pro. But in school, I did quite well academically around the areas of what ultimately make up sports science. So obviously PE being one of them, and the sciences, mainly biology and physiology. I had a natural interest there and was fortunate enough to do quite well. So like lots of people who want to go down that avenue, I chose to do sports science at university, and again did quite well because I was so interested in it. It's a real passion first and foremost, rather than any great levels of intelligence. And came out of that, and then that's where the big portion of luck came in. This shows my age, but I actually saw the job that I do advertised in a newspaper. It wasn't saying working with footballers, but it saying to work with athletes, and I thought, that is such an amazing opportunity. Lucky enough that it turned out he was working for a consultancy company called New Life Fitness that worked with a number of football clubs at the time, because it wasn't like it is now where sports scientists and performance coaches are completely embedded within the club. There was more on a consultancy basis. But that was amazing. I mean, I got to work at so many big clubs, and I was so wet behind the ears. I didn't have too much responsibility, thankfully. So I got unbelievable amount. The club that I supported, I was straight in there, Man City. I was working in the likes of Bolton, Leeds, who were in the Champions League at the time. It was just an incredible experience for someone that was relatively inexperienced and novice at the time. But got to meet loads of players, loads of coaches, learned loads from the people that I was working with. And then I was quite lucky in that my boss of the company at the time went to work with Prince Nassim full time. He was a really prominent boxer at the time, and he decided to elevate me to a lofty position. So I pretty much ran the company and controlled all the trainers quite quickly. And then after a while, like I said, the landscape was changing, that people wanted to know each person within that job. And now you see them, they're absolutely everywhere in the department, and not just one person. They're like multiples of people and specialisation. But since that, like I say, very lucky start, I've managed to continue to work in professional football and dipped into other sports. I'm in the 22nd year now. Wow. That definitely does show my age. But I mean, I look how hard it is for people to get into the industry now, and I've realised how incredibly lucky I was. But I think the shining thing to all of it has to be your passion.
Absolutely,
if you're passionate about the subject matter, you're passionate about just helping people, I think has to be the first and foremost in it. Then that's something that'll let you stay in an industry that can chew a lot of people.
Absolutely,
Unfortunately, it can be a little brutal.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's certainly interesting, fascinating for our listeners, particularly, anyone sort of looking to go down that sort of path as well. And I mean, just for our listeners, Tom, who are wondering what sort of a head of performance does, I mean, what does that involve in terms of, some listeners will be wondering, head of performance, they're familiar with different coaching roles in football and in sport in general, but I know it's probably you need a few shows to do justice what you do, but just generally in a nutshell, what does a head of performance do?
A head of performance is kind of like, it's changed from being a fitness coach, is what everyone called it at first, and it is what it says on the tin, really. You're in charge of fitness. So you're in charge of making sure, in my example, my case, footballers most of the time, they're as fit as in kind of sporting endurance and speed and strength qualities to their maximum, but within a particular framework for football. They're fit as in they're available to play, so you're in there to make sure they're as injury-free as possible. And then they're fit as in they're a healthy person, which goes on to multiple aspects of their life, but things like it has a perpetual effect on things like injuries and their performance. So within the fitness spectrum, you've got those three big parameters of performance, of injury prevention, and that holistic well-being piece as well.
That's really interesting, Tom. I think you mentioned there sort of, injuries and sort of, staying, the performance and particularly sort of, we've sort of heard, obviously, we've seen in the media, different football clubs talk about the sort of players and games. And is that like an integral part in terms of the training, how you sort of, what you do physically has an impact on sort of training in general to sort of peak at the right time? And I mean, I suppose for our listeners, there's a complexity really in making sure the players are sort of firing on all cylinders for, as often as they can. Is that sort of part of your role to sort of, monitor players, and you mentioned there minimise injury, but also make sure they're sort of firing on all cylinders as often as possible?
Yeah, there's been waves of kind of what is in vogue during my time in sports science. And there's this kind of counterbalance it was before of you're in there to push the players, but the more you push the players, the more likely they were to get injured. And as footballers become this absolutely multi-billion-dollar industry, this edge towards injury prevention has gradually got bigger and bigger and bigger. It used to be when I first started, you were in there to pretty much flog the player. As fit as possible. As time went on and the sports science evolved and the theories of overloading and burnout and things like that increased. The biggest thing from it was the money going into the game. So what was showing that to have your best 11, we're basically at the top level. It's as much about the players you purchase as much as it's how they train. You're buying in that genetic quality, and they've already got that athleticism, the skill level, the tactical nous within their God-given skills. So it got to a point where people were almost glass slippers, but they were really afraid to push these players because they thought, well, pushing them players, I'm at risk of injuring them, and then I'm going to get fired because I've injured De Bruyne, and he's getting paid like £500,000 a week. I'm costing the club millions and millions of pounds by causing this industry. But it's come into a more full circle that actual training load and pushing players will prevent injuries in the long term, because players have to have a certain bandwidth of loading that they're capable of. Some weeks playing week to week, and you can manage the training weeks or the training hard at appropriate times, but they've always got enough recovery before the games. But then say you come up to Christmas and all of a sudden they're playing 4 games in 9 days. Players got to have come out of what is the ordinary and have that extra bandwidth to be able to cope with those problems. So they've shown clearly over time that a fitter player will recover quicker, and a fitter player is less likely to become injured. So there's this perfect kind of curve that you're going on. So you're getting a player fitter, i.e. training them more intelligently and harder up to a point, will prevent injuries, and it's knowing which point along that is you're going to be pushing them too far to be going into this. So the curve starts to decrease, and therefore you're increasing injury risk. But it is a huge part, and I'd say the higher you go, the more that your focus is on injury prevention. But the worst mistake you can make is to not train your players to be fit.
Absolutely, that's really interesting. Just on that, Tom, one thing, sort of, I mean, obviously, you know, what you do, it's going to be sort of in strict confidence, but just as I mean, there seems to be sort of different schools of thought in terms of performance and fitness training, in the sense that at least many people I've spoken to, I suppose you've got a spectrum between some who, you know, fitness professional performance sort of do a lot of fitness testing. Some don't do as much and rely on other ways to sort of measure where the player's up to. What's your take? I mean, you've been in the game for a long time, and I think there's probably no one better qualified than yourself and to speak about. What's your take on it, Tom? Especially for like young players sort of listening who might not even play pro, but think, okay, well, I might do a few batches of testing just to see where I'm up to. Do you sort of think what's your take on like the fitness testing and throughout the year, Tom?
I can understand why it is avoided, because there's so many things you've got to work on. So you've got to work on tactics, technical, you've got to work on all your different parameters, and there's so many games in the day. And if certain endurance tests will take a high amount of loading, so if you do like a very commonly known one is a bleed test.
Yes, yeah.
By the time you finish the bleed test, you are absolutely spent.
Yeah,
so you wouldn't be able to do that much more training within that day,
of
and
course.
that player might be fatigued for at least a day or two. So to find opportunities to do that on a number of occasions during the season, it can be hard. So what a lot of the time you can see people that do invest in tests, they'll do it when the players report pre-season, towards the end of pre-season, and then maybe they won't test again. And actually, you want to gain that information. So a season where the performance implications are most prominent. So I can understand why people might avoid, and to do a maximum speed test, you put in your hamstrings at increase.
Of course, it's a lot about risk. Say,
for example, a centre back, they might not reach maximum speed for a number of weeks. People can get injured when they're doing these maximum strength tests. They can get fatigued from doing them as well. So that's why there has been a number of evolutions in it that people that do want to do testing, and I would recommend it because it makes you accountable. It makes you gives you training information about that player, what their strengths and weaknesses are, so you can use it for training targets, goal setting, etc. And then you can also use it to assess the work that you're putting into the player. So I will do it, but you have to do it in a clever fashion. So almost training becomes testing now. So people conduct things called submaximal tests, where they will do a very standardised test, not to complete fatigue, but then they will analyse things like heart rate. What is the heart rate at the end of the test, and how quickly does that heart rate recover after a minute? And that can be an indication of fitness. They can look at speed parameters for GPS loading while they're doing training. While they're doing strength training, you can work out what is that repetition maximum, so their maximum strength, by looking at what weight they've done and how many reps, and using calculations from that. So if you box clever and use some of the elaborate technology out there, like GPS, like force monitors, and a lot of the testing now is to do with readiness. So is that player fresh enough to play? So things like counter movement jumps, someone jumping as high as they can. A lot of people do that the day before a test, and if that's down, it shows indication of fatigue. And I'm not saying you'd ever go to a manager and say, don't pick this player. But it's then approaching that player and saying maybe some element of optimising your nutrition, maybe an ice bath, optimising recovery wherever we can, and maybe not doing the extras at the end, just to make sure you're good to go without implanting any messages in their mind that the fatigue, you're always to say you're good to go and ready. So, yeah, I can certainly understand why a lot of managers like Jose Mourinho would never do testing and they'd never follow GPS. But he's been incredibly successful because he uses the experience and coaching eye, and he has an amazing culture around his training as well. So there's always multiple avenues to success, and you'll see that out there if you compared a Neil Warnock to a Pep. They're very contrasting, but both incredibly successful. Neil Warnock has a critic, but he's the most successful critic. He's had more promotions than any other British manager. You've got to respect how he goes about his business.
Absolutely. Now, there's some really great insights, I think, Tom, for sure. And I think it's really fascinating in terms of for our listeners to sort of hear that the sort of balancing. It's kind of like a balancing act, really. You're sort of weighing up, and there's a lot of sort of variables. It's not just a linear situation where you can say, well, I'm going to sort of do a test in the beginning and the pre-season. Just periodically, there's a lot of factors you've got to take into consideration as well, and I suppose that's where people like with your experience come in, really, in terms of being able to say, okay, we'll find a way to sort of measure where the players are up to, and I suppose all you can do then is like you mentioned there, basically put the ball in their court and talk about these things. And I suppose with that, I mean, no doubt your role has come with challenges, Tom. We'll sort of talk about the highlights shortly. What would you say the challenge has been for you, sort of, getting to where you are and sort of, staying there in such a competitive field, by the way? It's like, we know football is just competitive, and, what would you say some of your challenges have been on your journey so far?
I think one of the main reasons you stay in the game is that, as I mentioned, that genuine enthusiasm for the job, the genuine enthusiasm for helping people, and I think if you just maintain that all the time, that want and desire, and communicate that you're trying to help people, you will invariably do well. In terms of the day-to-day challenges of the job, I think there's so much to do. I have mentioned this already, but you've got to work on all the different fitness elements. So your endurance is obviously important, but you can break that down into terms of like short-term endurance and long-term endurance, because football's kind of intermittent and sporadic. Sometimes you're working really hard in concentrated blocks, and that'll then die down a bit, but you've got to sustain that for 90 minutes, so it's elongated. Well, you've got to train all the speed elements, so you've got acceleration, deceleration, agility, maximum speed. You've got to train flexibility and injury prevention. That's without going into tactics and skills, which you could break into a million other different dimensions as well. And then you've also got to be ready to play 50-odd games a season, and robust. So there's so many things that you have got to try and achieve, that you've got to, number one, choose really effective training methods. 2, be super efficient. So wherever you can, try and kill 2 birds with 1 stone. And if it isn't really effective or important, just trim it away. Don't try and eat too much. So being efficient is doing things like using football drills to train fitness at the same time. So you loads and loads of drills in any sport that work on tactics and technique that are also super tiring at the time. And we use things like monitoring, heart rate monitoring and GPS monitoring to also know what endurance parameters all these different drills can train. And then you're working on tactics, you're working on specific movements, you're working on skill and all these fitness parameters at the same time. So that's really important. And then the big thing is try and make it enjoyable wherever you can, or just get that buy-in where you can as much as possible, because unfortunately there's quite a lot of our jobs that you have to say are not the most enjoyable part of a footballer's day. They all just love going out and the ball about, and they love going out and playing in front of the crowd. But we've got to do things like readiness, we've got to do things like prehabilitation, we've got to do the warm-ups, we've got to do the running training, which I don't always enjoy.
Absolutely, I'm sure.
Training, I've got to sit down and talk about optimum nutrition and all health and going to bed early and all these boring things. So it's really trying to find methods to kind of make it enjoyable, to get that buy-in. So things like goal setting that you're obviously an expert in.
Yeah.
Things like gamification, so making it super competitive wherever you can and making it fun. Bringing in other elements like culture and kinship and all having a shared drive and ambition and goal and shared language. All things have become a lot more psychological.
Absolutely. No, there's some great points, Tom. I think there's some really, really fascinating insights, and particularly for anyone sort of looking to get into the game or in the game at any level, really, there's a lot of sort of, takeaways there. It's not just a question of preparing a session, or it's a question of like doing all the variables you've mentioned there to create an environment that's buy-in and motivation. I suppose in terms of highlights in your career, I mean, what you're working for a great club, Preston North End is a big club and a lot of tradition, to be fair, and I suppose the expectation there is high as well. And in terms of yourself, what would you say the highlights for you has been in your career, Tom?
The obvious ones are your success. So I've been very fortunate enough to work at some good clubs and achieve 6 promotions in my time.
Wow.
Which I'm really proud of.
Yeah.
Obviously, I've mentioned City with my boyhood club, so we got them promoted twice on the bounce into the Premier League. So that was awesome at the time. It was pretty hard when we got in the Premier League.
Yeah, you got there in the end.
It got a little bit difficult then, and those times truly are magical. I mean, the things that always stick out for me the most is the journey back from Wembley or the Millennium Stadium on the coach. There's just that shared feeling of camaraderie and kinship and almost that family feel.
Yeah.
So that's been really good. But I must say, there's definitely been tough times in there as well. And I've evolved as a coach more during the tough times when we've been fighting relegation, because that's where you have to be so accountable for everything you're doing and dot every I and cross every T, because you're getting questioned from all angles, and you have to show clear lines of what you're doing is right, because you might
absolutely.
all these things out, but the team are getting beat when you go out on Saturday, and that's all people care about. So how can you come up with lines of communication and keep players motivated that you are actually doing the right thing? So you really do have to evolve. I mean, when you get in the flow of a good team and you have got good players around you, that's a big deal. Recruitment is huge in football.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, Tom.
You can almost do anything. Honestly, you could give them a week off once you've won 6 on the bounce, and you'll just roll up.
Yeah. Things are going well, exactly. Yeah.
A mental state of, you just think I won't be beaten. You see it with all the great teams, that Man United team that scored all those goals at the end of the game, even when they weren't playing well.
Last minute,
just found a way to get there. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. It's interesting points you've made, and I think that, I suppose that's where you need like strong characters like yourself, Tom. Basically, across the board, not just in the playing field, but all the way through. Every member of staff, whatever their role is, just to step up to the plate, really. And because obviously football, when things are going well, or any sport, it's great, but when things aren't going so well, it's like just getting out of that sort of cycle. But I mean, the app itself, I mean, you're the founder of the Hero app. Just for our sort of listeners, what does the app involve, Tom? A bit of an insight into the app itself. It seems pretty interesting to me.
So obviously nutrition is an important part of any athlete's development. It affects so many different areas. So I place high value in it, and within my time as a performance analyst, I've really tried to promote nutrition, but found it just incredibly frustrating in terms of the results I was getting. So we do things like sitting the lads down and giving them lectures, posters around the training grounds, cooking demos, take them out shopping, even visits to the house to just have a look around and help them out. But nothing really seemed to be hitting home. When I analysed most of the players' diet, it was still really, really poor, just poor choices, not healthy overall, eating out far too often, and they weren't getting this concept in there. Well, they were getting it to an extent, but with footballers, what you want them to do is you want them to perform as maximally as possible, but also to be lean and be healthy as possible. And nutrition affects all these things.
Absolutely.
But you have something called periodise it. So sometimes the performance side of it is more important. So when you've trained really hard or coming up to a game, that's when the performance has to take paramount for a professional athlete. But when they're not training as hard on rest days or off season or something like that, that's where you need to prioritise maybe about being lean a bit more and being healthy a little bit more. And that's the essence of what you call carb periodisation. So carbohydrates are the body's most efficient fuel source, so it allows athletes to run faster for longer periods of time. So really important when it comes to something like football. But when people were just getting really kind of processed food, simple foods, just going for the pastas, the breads, the sweets, and for the protein, it was just protein powders and maybe processed meats and things like that. Not the whole spectrum of really natural whole foods that have a kind of cross spectrum of providing carbohydrates, health, and fats and proteins, a bit of a mixture. So we started to think, right, how can we make players make the right choices when it comes to food choices? So we decided to create this huge library of meals, and we broke all the meals into what the goals of nutrition are. So we called one aspect of it performance fuel, which was our carbs. Then we called one aspect of it lean muscle, which is about being lean as you can, but recovering as well, and that was protein. And then health was the other thing, and we came up with something quite clever for that. We analysed all these meals, and we broke down all the things that are important for health and put them into a score, things like vitamins, minerals, healthy fats and fibre. So we divided that into something we called the colour fit plate. So they'd look at this, what is in essence a pie diagram, and straight away they'd be able to see through what we called it in colours and iconography, oh, that meal's going to help me perform, that meal's going to help me be healthy, that meal's going to help me stay lean, or it might be a mix of all three. So very, very, very easily players know now what is an appropriate meal, but then we still had this sort of stumbling block on behaviour. The players were just nervous and didn't have positive emotions about making food themselves. So we decided, right, let's make a video for every single one of these meals. So it'll give them that confidence. Even a real cooking novice, it's a 1.5-minute video. Anybody can follow this, and we always chose very simple meals to do it. So we developed this huge meal database, 400 meals on there for the players to do, and we got the technological environments to put this all into an app. And as time's gone on, we've added some other bells and whistles to try and tackle all these behavioural change problems about just making it as simple, idiot-proof, and just as hassle-free as possible. So you can, for example, you can order your ingredients on the app now and have them delivered. You can check all your nutritional information as well. You can get a nutritionist or a coach to jump on your system, look at what you've been doing, and write you a meal plan. We developed these things called meal builders, which rather than just says, oh, it's recipe, it teaches you how to cook ultimate variations of a certain type of recipe. So, for example, a stir fry, a salad, a sandwich, an overnight oats. So you become destined as your own master there and shape these pursuit goals. And then loads of different information and infographics, all super practical, animated, engaging. And then, I've been lucky enough that we formed that into an app. It started up with something called Colour Fit. And that's going to be a book that's going to be coming out in the summer as well, the Colour Fit methodology. It's a nutrition and fitness book. But we combined forces with this really established wellbeing company called Hero. And now we've reformed Colour Fit to what's called heroPro, and we sell that to within professional sport environments at the moment. And it's had over half the Premier League purchase it, multiple national teams like Welsh Rugby Union have purchased it as well. So it's something that's in vogue at the moment and just really took off. And
that's great.
I'm sure I'll look back on and be quite proud of when I
Absolutely, no, it's fascinating. That's, I think, Tom, it's really is. I think, it's amazing, what you put together there. I think it seems ideal, really. I mean, like you said there, I think nutrition is such a big variable in performance, and it's not always easy with a lot of information out there as well to have that. But if people want to sort of look at, find the actual app itself, Tom, is there sort of a specific place they can go to sort of find?
The website www.heroProsport.com.
HeroPro, okay, yeah.
Lots of information on there.
Brilliant.
And on any socials for HeroPro, you should find us there, and on social, which I post lots of useful information.
Brilliant.
And it's not just for elite athletes.
Yeah, no.
Applies to the general public. Everybody needs help with all the problem-solving steps that we provided in there. It's just that it was born in professional sport, but it certainly applies.
Yeah. No, that's really fascinating. I'm certainly going to forward it on to the help out a semi-pro team. I think that I'm definitely sort of forward the details onto them, because I think that obviously, what semi-pros it's like. Really, they've got jobs and their work, they're busy, and every little bit helps really in terms of performance. And this sort of sounds perfect. Even for that environment, really, I suppose it's a weight off your mind, really, to have that information accessible. So it sounds amazing, that Thomas, great stuff. So
making life as easy as possible. You don't need me to tell you this. You're the master on the NLP and psychology, but behavioural change is convincing the brain that it's easy and enjoyable.
Absolutely.
Brain as well.
Yeah.
It's a huge part of behaviour change. And that's what it's about.
Absolutely.
It's about what you do.
Absolutely, no, it is exactly, and also consistency too. So I'm sort of doing it day in, day out, and sort of, it's really interesting in terms of being able to sort of to be consistent and sort of stick to the plan as well. That's the big thing.
Yourself as a healthy person as well, like huge barriers.
Absolutely, yeah. No, absolutely, that's for sure, definitely. But it's been really kind of you to join us, Tom. Obviously, you're busy and a lot to do, so it's been kind of you to come on board the show, and really want to thank you for coming on board. It's been, fascinating speaking to you. I'm sure the listeners have got a lot of it, and certainly I would sort of, suggest, check out the app. Definitely, have a look and see, and it sounds amazing, to be fair. But thanks again, Tom, for coming on board the show. It's been great speaking to you. Wish you all the best for the rest of the season and beyond.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thanks very much for the invite. I really appreciate it, and good luck continuing the show and all your good works.
Thanks for that, Tom. That was Tom Little, Head of Performance at Preston North End, and the founder of the HeroPro app, and certainly sounds really fascinating. He's been kind enough to join us on the Friday Sports Show with your host, Jimmy Petruzzi, on Salford City Radio 94.4 FM.
You're listening